Hello everybody and welcome back to a new video. My name is Sarah and today I'm going to be going through my December wrap-up. Now, December I only read 4 books, however 2 of those 4 were 5-star reads, so they were books that I just could not get enough of. The first one being My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. I actually did a buddy read of this with Caroline over at Short Skirts and Sarcasm. I will leave a link to her channel down below in the description box. I know she did go on a bit of a hiatus during the month of December, but I do think she is planning on coming back in January. I first of all had a lot of fun buddy reading this, so thank you so much to Caroline for reading this with me. I know she really enjoyed it as well. Also, this title, the title of this book, wins as best title I have ever come across. And then another quick note is I didn't really know what to expect going into this book, but I definitely didn't expect to have my heart so emotionally toyed with and hurt as it was from the very get-go of this book. This book comes out punching. So basically we're following our main character Jade. She is just graduating from high school. She's a young Native American girl and she lives in this small town in Idaho and she is obsessed with slasher films. Doesn't matter what time period they're from, how well produced they actually are. If it's a slasher film, she's seen it and she probably has the whole script memorized. She has a complete fixation on them, and pretty soon she starts to see the kind of telltale signs that all link to a slasher kind of starting to actually happen in her hometown. And so she's kind of trying to convince people that this is actually happening, and then also try to figure out who is the slasher, and kind of what their motive is throughout the entirety of this book. However, we also spend a lot of time exploring Jade and as a character and kind of her traumatic past. She's kind of grown up always wanting a slasher to come to her hometown, and her fixation on slashers. You can kind of tell between those two things that she's not mentally healthy. She's been through some shit. So what I loved most about this book is actually something that I often hate in many other books, and that is how this is narrated with a very conversational tone. I don't know if you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know that I often comment that that was a huge downfall for a book, and why I didn't like it was because it was narrated in a very conversational manner. However, I think that is such an integral part of this book. If it was written without that tone, a big chunk of this book would have just been lost, because we get such a good picture into Jade as a character and kind of her thoughts and just a really strong sense of her fixation on slashers and kind of state of mind and her mentality of things and how she feels about not only her town but also herself, is just given to us through this conversational tone. Stephen Graham Jones did a phenomenal job with this, and I absolutely loved being able to just be right inside of Jade's head. So as we're going through this book, each chapter follows what's happening in the story, and then between each chapter there is a little essay that Jade wrote for one of her teachers, kind of giving a 101 crash course on what a slasher is and the different components of a slasher. And it just kind of adds a whole nother layer to her obsession with slashers, but also gives little tidbits of her life and kind of the history of this town as well. I think Jones did a phenomenal job of giving us Jade and then breaking her down and making her come to terms with her own past, and kind of her having to face that eventually, through different things that happen in this book. And it was just so incredibly heartbreaking. I will say this book comes with a lot of trigger warnings, a lot. There's suicide, there's sexual assault, gore, violence. I'm sure I'm missing some. I would definitely kind of look them up before going into this book if you're worried about anything like that. But I think think Jones approaches each very sensitive topic in a respectful and well-constructed manner. And when I say there's gore in this book, like, I was shocked how gory this novel got, even though, like, knowing it was, like, supposed to be a slasher novel. Yeah, quite disgusting. But very, very entertaining. The one thing, I'm still not sure how I actually feel about how, like, this book ended with, like, this big reveal of, like, what's all happening, like who the slasher is, who we can connect these murders to. I don't know how I feel about it. Like, on one hand, I thought it was really well done. On the other hand, I was kind of disappointed, but at the same time, not really. I don't know, like, I haven't been able to decide. But because even though I haven't been able to decide, like, how I feel about it, it did not lessen my enjoyment of this novel at all. I still really, really loved it, and I did give it 5 stars. I was surprised. I thought this was going to be a standalone. It does end in, like, a cliffhanger, and I looked on Goodreads, and it is supposed to be a series. I think it's supposed to be a trilogy. I'm pretty sure the second book is supposed to come out in 2022. Honestly, I do think it does stand well by itself, despite ending in a cliffhanger. I kind of liked that it ended in a cliffhanger if we were to treat it as a standalone, but I am very, very excited to continue with the series because despite how chaotic Jade was, I did really love her character, and I am very interested in kind of delving into another story with her. But yeah, I did give this one 5 stars. And then right after that, I read another 5-star read, and that is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This took me by surprise because this is very steeped in King Arthur, like the legend of King Arthur. I actually have, like, zero interest in King Arthur. I don't know why. I just kind of, like, avoid it. It's not something I gravitate towards, and so because of that, I had been putting off reading this book for a while, and I'm kicking myself that I put it off for so long because I absolutely loved it. Could not get enough of this story and the world and Bree as a character. So this is the first in, I think it's a duology. I know the second book is for sure coming out in 2022, and on Goodreads it only has the 2 books listed. So I don't know if that means it's only a duology or what. So we follow our main character, Bree, who is a young Black woman enrolled in this early college program at University of North Carolina, and she is grieving for her mother, who had passed away a couple months ago in a hit-and-run accident as her mother was driving to work. During her first couple days at this early college program, she ends up stumbling upon this event that is very clearly a magical event, and something that she's not supposed to be able to see or be able to remember. However, upon seeing it and remembering it, it kind of spurns 2 things. One being that she realizes what happened to her mother may not have been just a normal hit and run. And then 2, she gains the attention of the secret society that is comprised of the descendants of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. And so then she decides that she is going to find her way into the kind of inner workings of the secret society so that she can get to the bottom of what actually happened to her mother. That's the basic premise of this book, but there's so much more happening in this story, and, like, I don't want to say too much more about the actual plot because it was so fun and exciting to get to discover it alongside Bree. I think Bree is just a phenomenally written character. She is full of grief and anger at, like, not only her mother's passing, but also just, like, experiencing these things that young Black women often experience because of, like, the demographic that they're part of. And those topics were so well integrated into this story, into, like, the fantasy element of this story. It was so well done, and I feel like oftentimes it can be hard to take, like, real world topics and issues and, like, put them in a fantasy setting and make them feel so real and hit just as hard as they do, like, in the real world. I hope that makes sense, but it was something that I found really, really impressive. The magic system in this book is super interesting, and, like, I absolutely loved the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table aspect of this book. Like I said, it's not a legend or like an element of folklore that I typically like, but I had a lot of fun with it. Some of the twists at the end of this, like, they were so well done. You didn't really see them coming until right before they were revealed, and like you caught on as to what was actually happening or the answer like right before it was revealed, and you're like, oh, it was heartbreaking. I remember reading, there was like a whole section in the end that I remember I made the mistake of reading out in public, and I was like trying not to cry. I was like in a coffee shop and I was like, this isn't fair, not only for Brie, but the fact that I'm trying not to cry in public and I can't like properly just let my emotions spill forth. This book is just so beautifully well done. Tracy Deonn has such a compelling writing style. There's something about it that it just like right from page one, your attention is just like grabbed immediately, and she's got a way of like writing in such a quiet but strong way that it's like, pay attention to what I'm saying. And I don't know if I've ever really come across an author that has that same like pull to my attention in like the same fashion that Deonn has, and I just like was so impressed by it. I could not get enough of this, and I could not stop thinking about it after I finished it, and I'm so excited for the second book. And I highly recommend this if you're looking for kind of a good YA fantasy. I think that this is brilliantly done. And then after that, the universe decided that I could not win anymore. It was too much. I was getting too powerful with my 5 stars back to back. And so I was granted with disappointment with Into the Heartless Wood by Joanna Ruth Meyer. And this was like even more disappointing than just like me not enjoying this book, because it was one that I was like kind of really looking forward to this year. And it was just not it for me. I was like in the mood finally for like a fairy tale feeling fantasy, which is why I picked this up. We basically follow our main character, Owen. He lives on the edge of this magical dark woods that is ruled by Witch of the Woods and her 8 daughters that are tree sirens. And so being sirens, they sing and lure mortals into the forest for them to kill and take their souls and give them to the Heartless tree for their mother to use. So Owen, he lives on the edge of the forest because it's kind of the best place where there's no light pollution for him and his father to chart the stars for the king. And one day he has to go into the woods to save his little sister, but while he's in there, one of the tree sirens saves both him and his sister instead of killing them. And then there's kind of this like love story that happens, but then there's also this like war that is on the brink of happening and kind of spilling over into actually starting. And I was really looking forward to this, and I just didn't like it. Like, I was bored for a lot of it. I think the biggest reason is something about Meyer's writing style. It was like there was such a disconnect between me and the characters that I just didn't care. It was written in a way that like it was so obvious that you were supposed to have these like strong emotions between these two characters that were like in love, but they couldn't be in love because, you know, the one's a tree siren and is supposed to kill all mortals, and her sisters and her mom are unhappy with her, and she's getting like brutally punished for continuously letting this boy live. So it's kind of like star-crossed lovers type of thing, but I just didn't feel it. I just didn't care. I don't know, I just got bored. But there was like points, like overall the story at its very core was entertaining, and like there were points where I was starting to like really get into this book, and I was like, okay, we're picking up here, I'm liking this. And then something would happen, or like there would just be like a stylistic choice, and I was suddenly just like, no, no, I'm not about this anymore. I changed my mind. And like, speaking of stylistic things, one thing that I thought was really cool right at the beginning when I first saw it was that Owen's chapters are told in like normal prose, and then Saren's chapters are told, like, from her perspective, now I can't find one. They're told in verse. And I was like, oh, that's like a really interesting way to distinguish between the two characters and kind of like the otherworldliness of Saren the Tree Siren. However, I quickly realized that the stylistic choice was cool, but the actual like execution of it was so poorly done. The verse did not read any different than the prose. There was no tonal change. There was no like increase in like the floweriness of the word choice. It all just read the exact same. And I was just like, this could have just been written in prose. And it was just so frustrating to read something that was basically prose, but like formatted in verse, and I just did not like it. I was like, you know, if you're going to do this like drastic stylistic choice, you have to like commit to it all the way. You have to actually write like poetry when you're writing verse, and it wasn't there for me. It didn't do it, and I just was annoyed. And you know, I tried to get past that, and like I felt like I did, but I still just could not get into this book. Like I said, there were parts that were entertaining, like structurally in terms of like plot. I did like some decisions that were made. However, there were many other decisions where I was like, this is very cookie cutter. It's so obvious that like we're going in this direction. Let's like take some of those other decisions that I liked and like build on them, because yeah, I don't know, but I gave this 2.5 stars. The fourth and final book that I read in December was The Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. This is an arc, so thank you so much to NetGalley and the publishers for granting me access to this arc. The book does come out January 11th. So in this book we follow Xinyin. She is the daughter of the moon goddess, and she grew up on the moon with her mother, and as she gets older she realizes that her and her mother are almost like prisoners and held captive on the moon for something that her mother did before Xinyin was born to upset the celestial emperor and empress. And so kind of after a quick series of events, Xinyin has to flee the moon, and she goes down into the celestial empire. She decides that she is going to go kind of on this like series of quests to gain enough honor and respect to gain the attention of the emperor and the empress in order to win their favor and ask for the release of her mother. I did have a lot of fun with this book. I do think that it was very beautifully done. It's very fantastical and steeped in Chinese folklore. However, there was so much that happened in this book. This is, like I said, the first in a duology, but I feel like this book could have been split into two, and so I feel like if the second book ends up having just as much jam-packed into it, this should have been maybe a 4-book series instead of just a duology. We are incredibly fast-paced, but because of the like fast pacing and the jam-packed amount of things that happen in this book, I actually got a bit overwhelmed and kind of glazed over and kind of shut down while reading this, and to the point where there was a section towards the end where I was just kind of done reading it because I was so overwhelmed. That being said, there was plenty of things that I did really have a lot of fun with while reading. If it was split into 2 books, I think this would have benefited in not only helping the pacing, but we could have spent a lot more time on each event. I felt like we sped through each event that happened way too fast, and so it was kind of just like I didn't get enough of everything. I felt like it turned almost into a bit more of like telling instead of showing. Everything felt very episodic, which was kind of fun. There was like the overall connecting plot, but then each like event felt very episodic. It reminded me a lot of The Witcher, especially like the first two like prequels, where it's a series of like short story adventures that Geralt goes on, which basically happens in the first season of the show. I did really like Xinyan as a character. One thing that I did not like was the love triangle aspect. This is a personal thing. I really hate love triangles. They're so frustrating. But one thing that I felt was completely unnecessary was how it was almost a love square at one point, where I got to the point where it was like every man that she came across that like became some sort of semi-important character in this story ended up falling in love with her, and I was like, this is so unnecessary. Like, we do not need to keep collecting boys that are in love with her. That was frustrating, and it just felt almost like the I'm not like other girls kind of a thing. It was borderline. We didn't quite get there, but yeah, that was a little frustrating. It did just end up being like a love triangle, and while I didn't like having that, I do think that it was resolved fairly well. And in terms of like other resolutions, I do think that this book, even though it is the first in a duology, I think that in terms of overall plot, it stands very well by itself. I do see where like the second book would continue and like where that plot would go. However, I think that you can read this one by itself and still be very satisfied with it. I think it is a very fun story. It is a very like I said, very fantastical, very beautifully described, full of imagery. However, it was just way too fast-paced for me. We did too much without spending enough time on each thing that happened. And so overall, I did give this 3.5 stars. So those are the 4 books that I read in December. If you've read any of these books, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you consider sticking around and subscribing. And as always, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!